Good morning, and thanks everyone for joining us today for our webinar where we're going to talk about some statistics that we've seen from our benchmarking report. I'm very happy today to be joined by Sarah Vaus, who's Head of Governance, Risk and Assurance at NG Bailey, Robert August, who's Senior Auditor at Barnardo's, and Wesley Hageman, who's Director of Compliance Strategy and Operations at Adidas, all of whom have been Safecall clients for a number of years, and I'm going to share some of their insights and how they, what they kind of think of the stats that we're going to be looking at today. So during this session, we're going to be sharing some of the data and trends from our latest whistleblowing report, and you will receive a copy of the report post-webinar as well. We're going to be discussing some of the drivers and some of the key sort of reasons and insights that we're seeing. Please do take the opportunity to ask questions. We will be, we'll either pick them up during the webinar or we'll try and answer them at the end. And anything that we don't get to, we'll come back to you afterwards. There's a chat function at the side. Hopefully you can see that. So just pop them in there and we'll come to them as and when we can. So just before we start, some of you may not know Safecall. You may not be current clients of Safecall. So Safecall is a global whistleblowing services provider. We provide quite a lot of different services to our clients, from the hotline and online reporting channel for reporting concerns, which is what we're going to be talking about today, as well as training, investigations, and other services. We operate in hang on one second while I remember to move the slide on. See, too many jobs here. We operate in over 150 countries globally and support people in many different languages. And we've seen quite a significant increase, not only in the number of clients we support globally, but also the number of reports we're getting. Now, some of that is due to the fact that we're supporting more people, but also we have seen a real increase in whistleblowing reports in general. In our report, we look at things like the average number of reports per employee, how reports are received, where they're coming from, so the country, industry, whether it's direct employees or indirect employees, anonymity levels, whether reports are substantiated, and lots of other things, including kind of trends within different industries. We won't have time to talk about all of them today, but we are going to touch on some of the key points and talk to our clients about what they're feeling about that. So before we go into more detail, Wes, I'd be really interested to know, you've worked with us for quite a number of years at Adidas. Are you seeing kind of what trends are you seeing with regards to reporting across Adidas?
Thanks, Joanna. Good morning to everyone. And yeah, I mean, it's been a valued relationship over many, many years. And I think what we've definitely seen, 2020 being such a retail-heavy organization like we are, so global retail organizations during COVID, we had a massive shutdown, obviously, of various stores due to the restrictions in place pretty much globally at some point or another. So we had quite a drop in cases because interpersonal issues don't really happen when everyone is sort of in their homes. But since then, we've pretty much seen a constant uptick to sort of normalized levels within 2 years. But we're still just finding case numbers are drifting generally upwards. Several factors behind it, but certainly I wouldn't say we've plateaued in any way. There's obviously different mixes in the types of cases that we have and the severity of them. But nevertheless, definitely still finding people are, trusting our system and are reaching out for support when they run into events they believe that they should be reporting to ourselves for action.
And you've got a sort of fairly well-established system. You've been encouraging reporting for a long time now. So is there anything specific that you do in order to maintain and increase those number of reports that you're getting?
Something we always work on heavily is just communication, that people are aware of the channels they can report any issues. Because I think sometimes people are new to a company, they may be operating in sometimes their first job on a holiday in a store, be it in the US or somewhere in Europe. And it's all about just encouraging that speaking up culture. but also that action, that people are aware that if they do report something, however, how minor it might be, that those are taken seriously, they're managed, and that there is a result, particularly where the allegations are maybe a little bit more serious. That also mixed, in the end of the day, anonymity is also something we still, even though legally certain whistleblowing laws have changed in certain countries, anonymity also gives people that comfort in raising an issue, because no matter how many steps one puts in place, people can feel nervous that there might be retaliation, and it can affect their jobs and their future careers. So anonymity, we reinforce and protect to the ultimate level we can, because we do want people to always feel that they can reach out no matter how small the concern is.
Thanks, Wes. Robert, what are you seeing in Barnardo's with regards to reporting levels?
Yeah, it's similar to what Wes says in terms of during COVID times, the number of reports significantly reduced. Similar to Adidas, we have a large portfolio of retail stores, and they obviously would have been closed during periods of COVID. The numbers increased once work went back to normal, but we've noticed over the last couple of years that there's been a slight reduction in the number of reports, and part of the reason for that is we do regular communications around whistleblowing within the organisation, and we liaise with senior leaders and HR and other departments in terms of ensuring that reports we get in go to the correct channels, and staff that are communicated to staff around how they can report their concerns. So not necessarily every report that we receive is a whistleblowing report. It could be an HR type report. And whilst we accept it within the system and we triage them accordingly, one of the things that we've emphasised is around making sure we've got the right comms across the organisation as to the methods staff can use to raise their concerns.
Thanks, Robert. I think one of the things that's really interesting about the panel today is that you all come from very different organisations with different experiences. And Sarah, I know that NG Bailey, working in the construction sector, will also kind of have some, different observations. So what are you seeing at the moment?
Absolutely. So we've seen a significant increase in the number of reports. So to give you some context, in 2022, post-COVID, we had only one report per 3,062 employees. In 2023, that increased to one report per 1,608 employees. And then in 2024, we had one report per 853 employees. So we've basically doubled the number of reports between 2023 and 2024. This increase isn't necessarily a negative for me. So in our case, I think it reflects a greater awareness of the speak up process and hopefully a growing trust in the system. I think it's also worth noting we are relatively new customers to Safecall as well, and this is certainly a journey that we're on together. I think for me, there's a few things that are driving this change. We've made a concerted effort to promote our speak up policy and the associated reporting mechanisms. So previously, our speak up webpage, for example, it was very difficult to find. It required multiple clicks. Now it's accessible with just two clicks via a bespoke landing page and an improved intranet and web presence as well. We've also implemented a marketing campaign with ongoing communications, and we actively promote the Speak Up policy during key dates such as Wellbeing Week. On site, being a construction-based organisation, we've rolled out posters in breakout rooms and on the back of toilet doors to maximise visibility.
I mean, that's great. Well, first of all, well done. That's a great achievement to kind of double your sort of reporting rates. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think most organisations now recognise that a low number of reports does not necessarily signify, a great kind of culture or whatever. It can be. It could be that, but it can also be that people perhaps don't understand how to report or haven't got the trust in the system. And I think that where we see organizations really getting the most value is certainly when they are doing that kind of promotion that you're talking about, Sarah, and raising the training, doing training and awareness, and just simple things like explaining to their colleagues where the report's going to be sent, how it's going to be handled, that kind of stuff can really sort of help with that promotion. So it's good to hear that that certainly sounds like it's positively impacted NG Bailey. I'm interested actually now in, that I think that there's some really interesting insights, but interested in understanding from our viewers what your sort of feelings are. So we're going to do a poll. And the poll is, have the number of reports received within your organisation changed in the last 5 years? So are you getting more? They've gone down, or are they about the same? So I can see people are putting their responses in, which is great. That's really interesting, because whilst we might still have a couple coming through, it very much looks as though that nobody's seeing their numbers decreasing, which is probably what, oh, well, okay, so we've got one now, but the majority of people are either seeing more reports or kind of about the same, which I guess, from my perspective, sort of mirrors what we're hearing from our client base with regards to, to the fact that whistleblowing is becoming much more sort of understood, I think, and people are, they understand what it is, what they need to do, etc. And I think maybe for those that are about the same, perhaps a bit like, Wes and Robert were saying, they already have particularly well promoted and perhaps well used systems that they have. Anything that you guys would like to add to that? Any other thoughts?
I think for me, when we talk about that enhanced response, so we've put in place a fraud response plan, and we're actively training managers. So managers are often the first point of call when it comes to raising concerns. So just training them to be able to triage issues, know who to escalate to, and to ask the right questions. So that takes somebody through the immediate actions that they need to take upon a concern being raised. Detailed investigation process, what questions should be asked, and then how those are reported and managed as well.
Thank you. I'll just move on to the next slide where we talk about the average number of reports per employee. I find this really interesting because in 2020, the average, and we'll look into the sectors in a minute, but the average that we were seeing was that 1 in every 520 employees were making a report. That has gradually got higher, and now we're seeing 1 in 370 making a report. How does this kind of mirror what you guys are seeing? I think where's yours is probably a bit higher than this, isn't it?
Yeah, Joanna, 100%. Ours is probably, we actually, I think I ran some of the numbers, and we pretty much have a report for almost every 150 employees. But again, I think it's just the mix of our employee base from, we've got give or take 60,000 odd employees. We've got a heavy own retail presence around the world. We also just have certain dynamics where we do find that some parts of the world, people are, I could almost say, more comfortable in reporting issues in the workplace. Whereas we do find geographically in other parts of the world that comfort maybe necessarily isn't there, be it from historic reasons where people believe it's not really followed up and looked after, or that people might just tolerate certain behaviors in a different way. But generally, we've got several speak up channels in addition to Safecall, allowing our whistleblowing. People can also reach out internally. But yeah, historically, it's always been slightly above this. And again, we're not sort of scared of that. We would rather know and understand where challenges are, because we cannot, sitting in our HQ in Germany, maybe fully understand the dynamics that are happening in every country. So these statistics allow us to know, wait a minute, if we are having a spike in a particular area of the world, what is causing that? And often it can be changes in legislation, changes in elements that we can't even control. We do see an uptick in cases, but it does generally allow us to find a response to manage that.
I think that's a really good point, because we definitely see different rates of reporting in different countries, different kind of preferences to how people are reporting as well, whether that's online, phone line, etc. So that there are definitely those differences we see across the world. One of the things that we saw there in the poll was that a very small percentage of our viewers have seen a decrease in the number of reports that they're getting. I mean, Robert, is that something that you would see as a cause for concern?
Not necessarily a cause of concern on its own. The question would be around what comms or communications has gone out to the organisation in terms of reporting concerns. So, using the example I mentioned earlier, from our organisation's perspective, we've done a lot in terms of promoting how people can make their reports, but also that if it's, for example, an HR matter, that there are other methods that they can use to report those particular concerns. So I think that might explain some of the changes that you refer to. And I think it's important because if I look at our organisation over the last few years in terms of the number of reports that we've had, oftentimes they have been purely kind of HR related matters rather than what you would call traditional kind of whistleblowing matters. So we have seen an improvement in terms of the quality of the number of reports that we've had because of the extra kind of communication we've done across the organisation around what the reporting channels available to staff.
That's great, thank you. I'm just going to pull up the slide which shows kind of by industry, because I think this is particularly interesting. And I'm interested, you can see there that you've got very sort of, much lower kind of levels of reporting within financial services, and then as you would move through, we see that kind of the not-for-profit and emergency services are the highest levels of reporting within 2024. There's often quite a lot of reasons for this within different sectors and different levels of regulation, different channels that people can use to report. But interested, Sarah, in any of your thoughts on this?
Yes, as I mentioned earlier, we've seen a substantial increase in reports at NG Bailey, which aligns with the broader trend in terms of the construction sector. I think for me, there's a number of factors. So there's a growing awareness of the importance of speaking up in the construction industry, in my view. Often that's driven by initiatives to improve safety, ethical conduct and compliance. I think as an organisation, we're investing more and more in training programmes to talk to employees about their rights and responsibilities and how to report concerns effectively. I also think the industry is working to shift away from that culture where concerns may have been historically dismissed or overlooked, and there's a greater emphasis culturally about creating a safe and supportive work environment where employees feel comfortable raising issues without fear of retaliation. And I think this cultural shift is potentially encouraging more workers to speak up. I think for us as well, there's increased regulatory scrutiny and a focus on corporate accountability. So we've got the ECTA changes, so the failure to prevent fraud offence that's coming in September, that might be pushing on a lot of companies to take more of a proactive approach to fraud prevention and to encourage internal reporting of potential wrongdoing as well.
Yeah, I think that there's some great points there. And interested, Robert, in your thoughts on the non-profit sector. So in 2020, that was 1 in every 330 employees, and now we're seeing 1 in 100. What would your sort of thoughts be on that?
Yeah, I think there's a number of factors there. So if I use the UK charity sector as an example overall, obviously there's over those 2020, there's been some high profile cases of wrongdoing reported in the sector, which people will obviously be familiar with. And I think that kind of made the sector take stock around whistleblowing and reporting and what provisions are in place for staff to report wrongdoing. Charities obviously depend heavily on maintaining public trust and donor confidence, and when something goes wrong, it can have a huge impact on the organisation's reputation, funding, and their image, and can take years to recover. And I think because of that, there's been a marked emphasis on, as I say, robust whistleblowing policies, training, etc., so that everyone knows how to speak up when something isn't right. And again, if I use my charity as an example, we've emphasised the environment where speaking up is part of the culture, encourage staff and also our volunteers. We've got 15,000 volunteers to voice concerns, because ultimately we know that catching and addressing issues early help prevent potentially bigger problems down the line.
I think there's some really interesting points there, because what we tend to see is that organisations are looking at kind of what legislation applies to them. So you mentioned ACTA there, Sarah, but I mean there's quite a lot of legislation now within this area that whether it's the EU Whistleblowing Directive, which will certainly impact Adidas, or whether it's the new Worker Protection Act around sexual harassment, which I know a lot of our clients have been looking at and thinking about how to apply their whistleblowing services to that. There's a lot of talk in the UK about updating PEDA. So I think legislation is certainly something that a lot of our clients are very conscious of, and looking at how do they sort of incorporate that into their practices. And then the cultural piece, Robert, that you're talking about as well, building that trust and making people understand what's going to happen and have that confidence in the system. So I think all of those things probably have impacted in what we're seeing with regards to these increased numbers. And then, as you say as well, the media clearly plays a huge part in people's awareness of whistleblowing generally, in those high profile cases certainly. Any sort of, I find that we get a lot of questions about legislation and how kind of organisations approach legislation. And whilst this webinar isn't about that, I don't know if you guys have got any sort of other observations around that.
I have one observation in terms of the not-for-profit sector. So I'm volunteer for a social housing provider in South Yorkshire, and while I can't speak for the whole of the not-for-profit sector, there's been increased regulatory scrutiny, which has led to a greater emphasis on compliance and reporting. So, for example, regulators are pushing for increased tenant satisfaction measures and stronger complaint handling codes, and that's increased the number of complaints that can potentially be made. But then those changes are also empowering tenants to ensure their voices are heard, which again can drive up the number of reported concerns.
Thank you. I think I'll just touch on financial services there as well, because that doesn't come as a huge shock to me that figure is 1 in 680, because the sector is so highly regulated that we consistently see less reports coming through the Safecall channel, but that there are many other channels that people within that sector can choose to use. So that could also be a reason for that. And often, interestingly, the substantiation rates may be higher for some of those reports that do come through. So I guess what we're saying here is that there's a variation between industries, and even within that, as Wes was talking about there, there's different figures that you see for different organisations. So this is obviously a guide. It's the average across the benchmark that we're seeing, but a lot of it depends on the culture, the training, the awareness that we're seeing within the organisations. One of the things that we've consistently seen over the last year increasing is the number of people that prefer to remain anonymous when they're reporting concerns. And we've already touched on legislation, and it's encouraging to see more people are speaking up. But this figure has risen and continues to remain really high. Different channels that people use have different percentages of anonymity. But again, interested in your thoughts on this, and also, I suppose, kind of how if you have a high level of anonymous reports, how you approach those. So I'll come to you first, Wes.
No, thank you. I mean, obviously, the EU Whistleblowing Directive, you made mention of it, and quite strictly speaking, within Germany, where we are headquartered, there are certain types of allegations and whistleblowing that can come in that, strictly speaking, by the definitions of the local laws, we would not have to investigate them when they are anonymous in nature. But we've taken a very clear approach as a company to allow anonymity, because the rewards, as it were, for us as a company ensuring that we can have sort of a very open door to all employees far outweighs maybe being a little bit more selective in how we approach certain cases. And certainly there's also been a lot of focus in terms of what we refer to elements where there might be criminal conduct behind it. So this might be a situation where in extreme discrimination or extreme bribery and corruption issues, there may actually be levels of reporting should there be a criminal case behind it. The European Sustainability Reporting Standards, the ESRS, these are elements we have to report into. So this legislation has made it certainly, I'll use the word interesting, but it's all had to make us be far more aware of what cases are coming in, how we manage those to ensure that we meet the reporting as well as the legal requirements. But part of that, though, however, the sort of foundational element that we have not steered away from is anonymity makes people a little bit more comfortable, because let's be honest, many people feel that in this connected world, you aren't really anonymous if you use a web form, that somehow my company will know it's me that's reporting something. However we can sort of allay those fears, we will do that, because again, the reward is worth it. For sure, we may have certain cases that are very difficult to investigate, and we may not get to the bottom of particular allegations. However, it is still worth having that anonymity ability for anyone who wants to report something. And certainly we see no change or plan change to how we operate in that manner.
Thanks, Wes. Really interesting. Robert, Sarah, what are your views on this?
Yeah, we the majority of our or significant reports in our reports are anonymous. They tend to be more reports that we get online rather than through the phone, which is probably a natural position. A bit like Wes said, I think people will often feel, even despite having all the kind of communications in place, will feel more comfortable reporting anonymously. When we receive an anonymous report, we will treat it the same way as we would if it was semi-anonymous or a named report. We do outline if it's the online platform, we'll outline to the reporter what limitations there might be, and we do try and encourage them to provide a means of, doesn't need to be their name directly, but a means of contacting them so that their report can be investigated. But as I say, we treat anonymous reports the same as any other, and we do emphasize not only in our policy but in our communications and other documents related to reporting about the fact that obviously we maintain confidentiality. The information they provide is secure as well. So we make that clear from the outside to encourage staff to feel that the platform, our Safecall platform, is open to them, and they can be reassured that their concerns will be investigated properly.
Thanks, Robert. Sarah?
We're quite fortunate in that the majority of the reports that we receive are not anonymous, and people feel comfortable putting their name to them. I mean, in terms of the percentage there, it's not really a surprise. It's understandable. I think a lot of employees fear retaliation or negative consequences potentially for raising concerns, and this can be the case even when organisations have policies in place to protect them, because by reporting anonymously, it does give that sense of security, and it can encourage individuals to come forward with information that they potentially may have withheld if they'd have put their name to it. In terms of what we do, so we given there's a number of ways in which we support employees who want to remain anonymous, and even whether they do or they don't. So we signpost to support, for example. So depending on the issue raised, we signpost reporters to relevant support resources such as our employee assistance program, occupational health services. It could be external organisations and charities. That's often more difficult to do when it's anonymous. One of the benefits of having somebody use the telephone is often they may choose to change their mind when you're offering that support, and may choose then to provide their details.
It's a really good point, Sarah, and we see that quite a lot. I mean, I'm really passionate about the fact that people can remain anonymous, because I am confident that, you know, there'll be lots of matters raised that organisations wouldn't hear about if they weren't. But we do see certainly when people call us, once they understand the process that's going to be followed and who the information is going to be shared with and what the next steps are, they will then, you know, quite often feel more confident to share that information with us. And then clearly that enables you as our clients to kind of perform a more, I guess, robust investigation if you've got that information, because you can contact the person and have a fuller conversation. If you don't have those contact details, though, you know, what approach do you take, Sarah, when trying to investigate the matter?
I mean, it's always challenging, but I think the key thing is to just gather as much information as possible. So we encourage reporters to provide as much detail as they can, even if they do choose to remain anonymous. So the way in which we do that is via our Speak Up policy. We also have a landing page for the Speak Up policy on our intranet as well. We've used things like toolbox talks, which are particularly common in our industry, to talk to our staff about what happens when a report is made and how confidentiality is protected to prevent them from, in terms of anonymous, wherever possible. And then in terms of how we go about investigating that, you know, you just treat it like any other investigation. You'd assess the credibility of the information provided, and look for supporting evidence. We do try to focus on investigating the issues raised rather than wasting time trying to work out, you know, the identity of the reporter, because that's not appropriate. So we do just get to investigating the issues raised, and we conduct a thorough and impartial investigation per our usual procedures.
Sarah, where's Robert? Anything to add on that point?
Yeah, I mean, similar to what Sarah said, what we do in terms of anonymous report, as I said earlier, we would treat that the same as we would a named or semi-anonymous report, where it's been triaged to someone to investigate. We'll, if it's an online report, we'll send a message to the reporter online to confirm the contact details of the individual who will be investigating the case. We'll make it clear to people investigating that they obviously need to exhaust all lines of inquiry. Those lines of inquiry could be as simple as a desktop exercise. And the reason why I say simple is because obviously if you've got an allegation which you haven't got sufficient data to support it, you obviously have to be mindful about interviewing staff, etc. So we'd say we'd follow that particular routine, and we'd report back as we would any other normal report in terms of the outcome. So the outcome, we wouldn't provide details to the individual who's anonymous. What we would outline is that the matter has been investigated. As I say, being mindful about confidentiality, we wouldn't share any details to someone that's anonymous.
Robert, Wes?
Yeah, I think one other element that we also look at is any trends that are coming out, because we might have very little evidence, but there's an accusation against inappropriate behavior against a certain person. That by itself, potentially, we may not be able to sort of ascertain, you know, if there's any veracity behind the allegation. But when you've received the third or fourth complaints that are clearly coming from different people, maybe one of them is named, 3 are anonymous over the span of 3 or 4 years, then you can start saying, wait a minute, there does appear to be something systemic here. And sometimes that systemic nature allows us to actually say, well, we need to take action, maybe it be with HR, linking in our employee relations team. Yeah, so the trend itself can sometimes also indicate that there's potentially a problem, because if it's coming up over and over from different people, then it's not the individuals raising the concern. Quite clearly, there's something else going on. But we follow the same approach, I think, generally that's mentioned, protecting the anonymity, taking every case seriously. What I always tell my team is, for the person raising the case, we may look at it with the vision of looking at hundreds of cases and go, this is not a major issue. For the person phoning or writing in, this is important enough for them to have reached out. And we must always consider it from that mindset. It's a big thing for them. Maybe doesn't change what we see, but for that person, it's a big step for them. So we need to try and help get the best result with what we can.
Where's that? That's a really interesting point. And I was going to wait till the end to do the questions, but I think it actually, Angela, who's joined us, has asked a question that I think is relevant to what you just said. So I'm going to read it out and I'd be interested in your thoughts. So she's saying, I totally agree on your reading that more reports is a good thing to gain understanding of what is happening in the organisation. However, and she's a group ethics officer, get a very strong pushback from top management claiming that we have overdone it and now everybody reports anything. Do you also experience that internal pushback? Now, I'm guessing from what you just said there about the importance of investigating all concerns because somebody found that, at the time to make that report, you may not do, Wes, but have you got any sort of thoughts or any suggestions for Angela on what she's experiencing there?
I think in a way I can say we're lucky that we have got a very solid relationship with top leadership within our company. Our board member in HR is actively involved when employee relations is involved. We've got a very clear culture and what we refer to as our fair play code of conduct and everything feeding from that. So I think we are quite lucky that, we're not seen as being something to sort of tolerate within the company. It is seen as a point of pride. Even within Germany, our Works Council, which, has a very good relationship with us as well, is always keen to know what is going on case-wise, to have a full understanding of what trends are going on. So we are quite lucky from that perspective. I think certainly, though, the way to approach this question and this scenario more directly is to look at what positives come from this. It may take a while to build trust in these processes, but that certainly, when people are speaking up, it should be seen as in the end of the day, for 10-20% of items that are raised, it may not affect the bottom line of the company. However, over time, the benefit to the company in happier employees, in employees who are comfortable in their jobs, there's that reward. But also, if people are happy to speak up, they will also be flagging fraud, theft, and other events that can become material. So yes, you kind of have to create and develop a system across the board. But there are the benefits that come from it, that when employees are comfortable in raising major concerns, that feeds from them being comfortable to raise minor concerns first. And staff turnaround and people feeling listened to, that benefit comes through in any staff surveys that are done in many companies. So it sort of is something that takes a while to build that trust. I do acknowledge that. But there is a benefit to it. It's not sort of a sunk cost that we have to do. There are definite benefits.
You've made loads of points there that I think are really, really useful. But I think that senior management team buy-in is really important. And I think one of the challenges actually, if you're getting lots of reports and you're promoting your service well, that's great. But it's quite easy to lose trust in the system as well if that you're not responding or you're not and what you're saying there was about employee surveys. It's just as likely to have a negative impact if people are raising concerns and then aren't feeling that those have been addressed or what have you. So I completely agree with that. Just before we move on, I just wanted to check whether Sarah or Robert, you wanted to add anything on that particular question about the senior management team buy-in?
Yeah, I mean, that's been front and centre in terms of our organisation. I mean, prior to having Safecall, we had another service provider, but before that, the Whistleblowing reporting line was in-house. It was through our senior management, through staff survey, reviewing the staff survey, that senior management decided actually what we need is an independent body to support us with that whistleblowing, and that's from the top, from our chief executive, the part of our corporate leadership team and our boards of directors. So there is very much an emphasis at the top for the organisation that staff, it's important that staff report wrongdoing. Going back to the point I made at the start of the webinar around, you want to identify your concerns early so you can actually deal with them rather than them fester.
Yeah, I agree. I think one of the other things that we've done is working with boards in terms of training them on their, I guess, obligations and some of the legislation and reputational issues that they will want to avoid. Nobody is going to want any of this stuff to kind of, to not be handled correctly. So that's certainly something that we have done previously, Angela, as well as working with those senior teams to help them understand their obligations and why this stuff is important and really should be taken seriously. I'm going to move on to the next slide in a second, but just before I do, we're going to do another poll. And there is a question around the phone line as well, which we'll come to, but what do you think about kind of, how most people across your organisation are raising concerns? What, in your view, for your organisation is the most popular channel? I think main channels there. I'm sure there are other channels that people can use. I'm going to wait a minute to let a couple more come through, but that's really interesting that we're seeing 0% through the phone line. And I will come back to that. I'm going to pop it onto the next slide whilst we're waiting for those to come through. But so vast majority there coming through the online channel, which mirrors you'll see in a minute, it mirrors kind of what we're seeing and the trend that we're seeing. Email has been reducing year on year, largely because we are kind of, our feedback to our customers is that it's not the most secure channel, and it's certainly not the easiest way of remaining anonymous, which we just talked about. So we've seen a decrease in terms of the numbers of reports that are coming in through the phone line. However, there's still almost a third there coming through the phone line. So I'm a little surprised to see that there was such a low number from our audience. Interestingly, let me find my, just 5 years ago, 56% of all of our reports came through the hotline and 30% came through the web. And that has changed over time, as you can see here. So now it's 67% are through the web and 29% through the hotline. From my experience and from doing a bit of the analysis behind these stats, we see a higher percentage of named reporters through the phone line, as we've talked about. We also see a high level of substantiation, probably because it's easier to investigate, and also when we've done some analysis of the types of matters that are raised through the hotline versus through the online channels, we tend to see more severe matters are raised through the phone. And my personal view on this is that humans still like to talk about something if they're really worried about it, and they like to explain what's happening, and they like to kind of make sure they've been understood. So there may be more of a preference in those cases to make a phone call. Again, geographically, there's lots of different parts of the world have different sort of preferences. But I'll be quiet now because we've got some experts here who can give their thoughts on it. So Sarah, I'm going to come to you first.
Yes, so we're seeing a broadly similar pattern to what's on screen there, with a significant proportion or a greater proportion of reports coming through the online portal. However, we do still see a good proportion coming in via the hotline as well. What we have noticed is that people who are reporting from outside of the organisation are more likely to use the online portal, or email, while those who are internal to the organisation tend to use the telephone. And I think in the construction sector in particular, that there's several reasons why telephone reporting is preferred. So I think we have many operatives and engineers who may not have consistent access to computers or online platforms, especially when they're working on site. You may find that some people prefer the opportunity to ask questions and have dialogue with a person when reporting a concern, and that's where the telephone can be a benefit, and that it differs from person to person. I think as well in construction, we do remain a very traditional industry. A significant proportion of the workforce are out on site, and they may not have access to a laptop or even a company phone. So for us, that makes online reporting, and certainly for the majority of our employee population, less practical. And I think that's what drives our higher rates when it comes to using the telephone.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. And we see that as well, where there's lower levels of literacy. People will still obviously pick up the phone rather than making those online reports. So there's some clear reasons why people would do that. Robert, what are you seeing?
Yeah, in terms of the number of online reports, we get a roughly about 67% that are online, and the remainder are via the phone, and that's been consistent over the last few years. I guess in general terms, I think the prevalence for online reporting is kind of aligns to the use of smartphones and the availability of better communications in different areas. So I think there's that natural move towards online reporting. Also, I think it's the point that Wes had made earlier on. I think, for example, someone that wants to report anonymously, they would feel more comfortable reporting online than necessarily speaking to someone directly in those situations. I mean, if I use our organisation as an example, any of our staff actually work in remote locations or work in stores, and for those staff who are of varying ages and varying capabilities when it comes to using computers and smart devices, often we'll get a phone call from them about their concerns rather than using the online platform. The other side of that as well is that we've made a concerted effort to promote both the online and the phone reporting method. We have made a concerted effort to focus on the phone primarily, going back to the point you made, because we often result in more detailed reports that can obviously help in terms of the investigation process. And we find as well from our stats that people that do use a phone are more likely to provide, either being a named report or semi-anonymous report.
Thank you. And Wes, you've got reports coming in globally. Are you seeing any sort of trends when we think about the methods of reporting?
Yeah, I actually, when I saw this draft, I actually went to check our numbers to see how they were correlating. And I mean, we still have about a third of our cases coming in via the phone call side of it. But it is definitely down as well. So it is following the trend. And I think Robert has touched on it in terms of technology. People are a little bit more, sort of a smartphone 6 years ago versus today. I think there's a far more uptake in all parts of the world. And I mean, generally the sort of utilizing an app for sending be it a customer complaint to pretty much anything these days uses sort of a familiar web format. It's become kind of the new norm, as I suppose an AI chatbot will become in the near future for a lot of elements as well. But definitely sort of email drop-off correlation appearing here. The one thing I haven't looked at is sort of regional statistics, if there's a regional element behind it. But we do believe there is value in the phone, because we do have store employees who, again, don't have, as Sarah mentioned, don't have access to company-linked devices. So that ability for people to reach out, and we also utilize this for some of our third-party reporting. So we do get an occasional customer complaint regarding one of our products, but we pass that on and manage those internally as well. And yeah, it's certainly it's changing, but I think again our primary element is we want to make it as easy for possible for someone to raise something. Again, being able to sort of say, well, can we get a phone call where we can gain extra info? It's always the first prize, but we would rather be aware than not aware as sort of the second prize.
Completely agree. And I think, obviously I'm pretty passionate about the ability for people to report through the hotline as well as the online channels. And there's some debate about, is the hotline dead? And I absolutely don't think it is. I mean, these stats would tell you that it's not, but also I just think logically that there will, where people will be happy to do other things online, whistleblowing is still an emotive conversation. And I still think that some people will not make the report via another channel. And to your point, Wes, you want to be able to make sure that you're hearing about these things. So I think it's important to be able to offer that choice. And I think that, we will see kind of that continue over time, regardless of sort of, how technology continues to advance. Sally online has asked whether there are any tips for encouraging people to use the phone line rather than the web. She's saying that they promote both equally, and she can understand why people choose the web form, but would love for more people to use the phone line for the reasons we've described. I mean, I think again, there's a number of things you can do around awareness promotion in terms of perhaps, some of the stats within the benchmark report might be interesting, Sally, because when you think about kind of the substantiation levels and that kind of thing, if you're feeding back to your workforce around, at a high level around trends that you're seeing, if those trends are that there's, more that's able to be investigated more fully or more that are substantiated when they're coming through the phone line, that might encourage people to speak up more. I don't know, guys, whether there's anything that you would suggest to Sally on that.
I think it goes back to the point I made. We've put out a lot of communication, which is focused both on, as I say, the online and the phone line, but more over the phone line. Even posters, the phone number is more kind of front and centre, although you've got the online option as well. Those are the big, and just general communication across the organisation, just to advise staff about the benefits of using the phone line.
Yeah, thank you. Just moving on to the next slide, and we've actually talked about this, so I'm not planning on kind of talking much more about this, but this is just the stats of, where we're seeing kind of that much higher percentage of people being named through the phone reports and through the online reports for all the reasons that we've already discussed. I mean, ultimately, we want people to be speaking out. We've talked about, why that's important. So whether they're named or anonymous, we want to hear from them. Just coming to each of you in turn, and I'll start with Sarah, kind of what are the top 3 things that you think viewers should be doing that will help promote a culture where employees feel empowered to raise concerns?
I think, well, the first one is to lead by example. It's all about that tone from the top. It is so important. So I look to gather support from our senior leaders to actively champion the speak up culture. I think that's really important for leaders to demonstrate their commitment to addressing concerns and ensuring reaffirming that those who speak up are protected. So in our organisation, all leaders in the business perform safety tours, and we're adding questions regarding speak up, and we're capturing other important areas relevant to our industry, such as modern slavery. I think as well, it's about creating safe and accessible channels for individuals. We've spoken about all the different ways of reporting, and I think there's pros and cons to each one, and it's about providing multiple accessible, easily accessible and well promoted reporting channels that give both online and offline options, and making sure that employees are aware of these channels and how to use them. And then another key one for me is around ensuring that investigations are dealt with swiftly and they're conducted fairly. So that's about establishing making sure you've got really clear procedures for how investigations are going to be undertaken and how reports are handled, and just making sure that they're conducted promptly and fairly and impartially. If those things don't happen, then word will soon get around, and that does break trust. I think it's also important to communicate the outcomes of investigations. That can be tricky to do, but it is possible, because that demonstrates to people that concerns are taken seriously and that action is taken where appropriate as well.
Thank you. I agree with all of your points there, Sarah. Wes, how about you? Anything to add there?
I mean, certainly timely response. Sarah's mentioned it. I won't expand, but that is, people need to see that action happening as quickly as is reasonable, given the circumstances that might exist. One element that's also very important is just trust with information. So we've got a very much, we're in a brand company. So, secrecy isn't everyone's greatest thing. We always want to, pump the new thing, what is being released, etc. But within compliance, we have an incredibly, limitation on sharing of information. We pride ourselves on pretty much no leaks. So nothing is mentioned to anyone, regardless of the circumstances of the cases we're investigating. We keep that very tight, quite purely because that builds trust. People trust us because they know when a concern is raised, it's not going to end up in the rumor mill that might exist around the office. So that is just the number one rule that we have as a team. We just do not discuss anything. We even compartmentalize information within our very small compliance team to keep things very much in a need to know. And I think on a third level, just for 3 points, is that we are consistent in how we approach things. So people know when they reach out to us, there's a consistency in how we deal with it, irrespective of which impartial investigator is involved, that in the end of the day, that everyone always just has a comfort that the process is pretty much followed the same way, and not that anyone has similar circumstances but utterly different outcomes. That one's challenging. We're a global company, but we do try and keep that close to line.
Sounds like a great setup there, Wes. Robert, finally from you.
Yeah, I guess reiterating the points made already. I think one of the key things is to establish like a visible leadership and accountability. So appointing a whistleblowing champion, that could be board level or trust level champion that's dedicated oversight of the whistleblowing issues. It signals the tone at the top for the organisation. Training is another key one around raising awareness for staff, but not only that, for people investigating, ensure that they've got the proper tools to investigate concerns that are raised, having clear, accessible communications like handbooks, posters, digital channels. One other thing as well is around implementing robust support and protection mechanisms for reporters. So that's like developing an anti-retaliation protocol or provide dedicated support for people that report concerns.
Thanks, Robert. We're into the last 2 minutes, and I do have, we've taken the questions as we've gone along, but the final question I have is from Merlin, which is, which team has responsibility for assessing concerns raised and determining whether it is a whistleblowing concern or a grievance? So basically, who's triaging? Sarah, who does that within, which team does that within your organisation?
So for us, it's owned by internal audit. So we do the initial triage. If a concern comes into a line manager, for instance, as the first point of contact, again, I'd mentioned we've got a clear fraud response plan that indicates where a concern should be directed, and then if it is that we need to speak to HR or other organisations, we'll get that support.
Thank you. Robert, is it where is it?
Yeah, it's the same. So it's in internal audit. All reports come through to us, and we review the report. We review them as a team, review them just to sense check them. And again, it would be triaged accordingly. So it might be triaged to, for example, HR if it's a HR type matter. It might be investigated by one of the team, or we might get, depending on the complexity, might get someone external to investigate concerns.
Thank you. And Wes, finally?
Yeah, briefly, I mean, on our side, it's automated to a degree. So salary issues would go straight through to our HR teams. But we have a joint triage agreement with our ER department, our employee relations department. So between compliance, ER, we will assess a case, the severity, and figure out the best next steps collectively.
Thank you. Well, that's all we've got time for today. Look at that, bang on 10:30. It's like we planned it. Thank you so much to the panel. Really interesting insights. I certainly found it super interesting, and I hope everyone watching did. Thank you for joining us. As I said at the beginning, we will be sharing the benchmarking report. And if you do want to discuss anything in there or get any kind of more guidance from us, then please do get in touch. Enjoy the rest of your day, everyone. Thank you.
Take care. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.